So I got asked, uh, why did you choose to go and work for the big tech companies in the corporate life instead of building out your own company? And it's a question I've been thinking a lot about ever since I saw it. So thank you for asking. But it's actually kind of a question that assumes a few things because I've actually started my own company several times. And so the end result is that being asked, hey, why don't you start your own company? Why did you stay with the corporations? That's actually not the case. I didn't actually do that. It's true, though, that I did start out pretty early working at MS over in Redmond. I was very lucky enough to get a job working for Mr. Gates. And it was interesting because it was literally Bill, Rick, Joe, Lauren, and then myself. That was the org chart. And so I was, four people away from Bill G on the org chart, and I bumped into him regularly in the hallways. Talked to him several times. Once got pulled into a meeting to be a fly on the wall, and that was an educational experience to watch him work. Um, but the big issue really is that if you look at all the technology companies that have been successful, especially companies like Microsoft, for instance, you had the engineer and then you had the business guy. At Microsoft, Steve was the business guy, Bill was the engineer. And if you look at Apple, you've got, well, it's interesting because there was some interesting people behind the scenes that did a lot of business stuff. You don't hear a lot about them, but the designer, tech engineering side, you hear a lot about him. And so the big issue is that I haven't found my Steve, and that's really hurt my success because early on I actually had my own little company. I literally it's funny, I literally was just a customer of a company, and I complained about their technology so much to the owner where I was just like, okay, look, this is BS, this is BS, this is BS, let me fix it for you. And that was literally how I got my first job with a little company called Active Web Hosting that no longer exists. And I was not happy about some stuff that was going on in the server that I was hosting my websites and things on. And so I reached out to the owner, had a good discussion with him, learned about some of his business problems, and then offered him a solution to it and said, "Look, I'm going to, just let me take care of it for you. Let me actively do the work." And I did. And that snowballed. And I was able to start there and just leverage that and start a small company that eventually got successful enough that I was able to, get the hardware I needed to keep learning and keep growing. And at that point, I was in a really good spot. And then I got a recruiter phone call from MS, actually. I got called. I was joking with a friend the night before. We were doing what I'm just going to call a binary binge, where we were up late drinking and on IRC and programming and challenging each other to do code challenges and seeing who could do the best, fastest, whatever. And we got talking among our group about the different big tech companies that existed at the time, which weren't many. Microsoft was one of them, and we actually, it's funny, they were like, yeah, because they were all open source people, and so was I at the time, and we were doing Linux. Linux was the hot new thing, or had been for a while, and we've been using Linux for a while. I remember I was running Gentoo at the time, and I was running Gentoo on an Ultra Spark, which I still have upstairs, and the I remember thinking, oh yeah, working at Microsoft, like how would anybody respect me if I did that? Like the Linux community would hate me if I did that. Or at least that's what my friends kept telling me. It was like, yeah, because I made the joke, like, yeah, who knows? Maybe I could learn a lot from Bill. And I got some shade in the chat from that when I said that. I got told that if I were even to think about working at Microsoft, I would be considered a social outcast in the programming community. And I thought that was kind of weird at the time. And so the next day I was doing my laundry. I came back from doing some laundry, and I had a big old hamper on me, and then my phone rang as I came back to my apartment, and there was an odd voice I'd never heard on the phone, and they identified themselves as a technical recruiter, and they made a big show about the fact that they were calling for a job at Microsoft because I'd placed my resume online the night before as part of the whole joke. And apparently my experience and skills were valuable enough that they actually thought interviewing me was important. And at the time, I thought it was just my friend Mark messing with me. I thought maybe he had just called up one of his friends that I didn't know and was just using that to, troll me a little bit. I told the recruiter that. I'm like, is this legit? Turned out it was. And so I actually talked to my girlfriend's dad at the time and managed to get a ride out there. And it was quite a trek for us because I was living in a different part of the state at the time. And I went through the interview, which was in C, by the way. And I pointed out that the problem that they asked me to solve had a multi-threading issue on top of solving the problem that they gave me. And I explained the multi-threading issue, explained the security concerns for the multi-threading issue, and they were impressed. And that was actually the second time I interviewed, because the first time I interviewed, long story short, I was told that they were so impressed with me that they actually thought that the job that I had been asked about would be what was the words they used? Brain drain. And it wouldn't be something that I'd want to stick with. It was actually, I think it was driver testing or something to that effect. And it wouldn't have been good for me. And so they bumped me up to a software development, and they gave me an internal referral. And I managed to wow Lauren, the gentleman who eventually became my boss in the first Microsoft role that I had, working in Microsoft Research on the SPOT team. And I remember it was me, David, and I believe Rabindra was his name. And we also had Janice, that's what her name was. And that was the team that I was on. And I learned a lot about GIS from Janice, a lot of GPS stuff, because you don't remember the Spot Watch. It was effectively the Apple Watch 10 years before Apple released a watch. And we were, the public information that's available on it was that we were doing over-the-air broadcast using FM radio. And so I learned a lot about radio and GPS and embedded systems. And I learned C# on the job as part of that. And I would later go on to helping with the CLR and learning F# on the job as well in a different Microsoft research role. That actually was in 2019. So I guess technically about 14 years later. And that was the start of my career. And so the reason I wasn't going to start my own thing was because I was literally starting my career at in Redmond. I was already there. I was at the top already, and I was extremely lucky. I did what I could to stay humble. I did what I could to keep asking questions. And I remember sitting in the cafeteria of Building 32 at a round table, and I remember thinking to myself that the people around the table had come from so many other different countries. I believe Rabindra was from Sri Lanka, I believe. And David was from another part of the United States. But I also had other team members that weren't part of my immediate team that were part of our larger org that were from, China and Taiwan and Hong Kong and, uh, just the UK and just different people because I was surrounded by the best in the world, and the company had put a lot of effort into making sure that those people were the best in their fields. So I got lucky because here I am, this kid who had literally just given up his business to be there, and that was it. Walked, halfway across the state to do it. But these people had to fly into the country. They had to deal with immigration issues. They had to deal with all the BS, and they were there. And I could learn from them. And it was an amazing opportunity that I took full advantage of. And this is why I say you should be asking questions. Ask questions. These are rendered, which is nice. And that's not a bad render from that prompt. Um, let's see. Just add fairies just because. And from my perspective, the most valuable part of that wasn't that I was bumping into Bill Gates. It wasn't that I learned that, I learned the number of monitors that Bill Gates has, which is 3, by the way. And it wasn't about the team's diversity, although that really helped. I wasn't just working with software development engineers. I was working with a biz dev gentleman. I was working with my lead, who was experienced in a lot of different things. I was also friendly with the electrical engineers. And so I was able to leverage my electrical engineering background from all those times I'd spent hours in Radio Shack, which doesn't exist anymore, at least not like it used to. And so like I was able to really grow and able to use a lot of my skills immediately. It was extremely fulfilling. And to be honest, it's been a while since I've been in a role that let me do all that because the companies don't do that anymore. And I often find myself like enjoying the times I go into research again because every time I've been at MS Research, I've enjoyed myself by the diversity of thought and the technical prowess that I was exposed to and continuously able to learn from, but also able to contribute because of my own skills and abilities. And so it's important that you understand that knowledge doesn't have a country. And neither really, neither should your perceptions. Learn what you can from other people. Ask your coworkers about their lives during lunch. Try to make real connections. Ask them about how they do things. If they're trying a new dish or something and they're poking at it, ask them why. I had those interesting discussions, and it was really a part of me just opening the world to me. But it was also an attempt to connect. And I miss sitting next to David and Rabindra. But I also know that was so long ago, they probably don't even remember me. And I would be very surprised if anybody I worked with back then remembered me. But if they did, I was probably just a fresh-faced kid who didn't know anything, who asked a lot of questions and tried to be respectful, and probably wasn't because I was so passionate about everything. But over the years, I stayed in the corporate environment and uh, a little bit, but I also did startups. I was a part of several startups for a little while there, and I think the reason I wasn't successful in those startups, it's interesting because my experience in startups is one of two things. I'm working for somebody else and I'm, an employee. And that's a very different experience than being a founder at a startup, which I've also been. Because if you're a founder, you're exposed to so much more. And you're also able to have access to more in terms of, access to the data on the company, how things are working, how things work in general. And I have always been on the engineering side, no matter what, because I don't have an MBA. And so I've always felt like that's limited me. I've always felt like that's not a bad picture. There's no ferry anywhere though. Um, and so like you have to understand that when I've been a founder, I've actually been more successful with the startups because I was able to be more self-directed. I was able to do what mattered. I had the authority to overrule people who wanted to do stupid things because they were just employees and they didn't have the context that I had as a founder. And so there have been several times when I've been a founder where the company was on the cusp of becoming a unicorn. In fact, several companies that I've started did become unicorns. And then they got stolen because of my business partners who betrayed me because, in their words, I was just an engineer. And so asking me why I didn't start my own company is kind of painful because I did several times. And every single company I've started, I've lost to the business side because the business side, you know, stole from me, intentionally diluted me out using shell games, chose not to vest my shares on the last possible day in order to get the most value and code out of me before they, took everything and then sold it to a venture capitalist the next day after their shares vested. And that's painful. Because if I had more money right now, I could do so much to help people. I could be the sort of billionaire that people dream about. And that, I suspect, is why I haven't been allowed to be successful. Because every time I build something, it works. And if something working is what's required to get people to use it, whether or not they have to pay, I'm the one creating the value proposition. So it's always going to work because you give me the BRD or the business requirements document, as they like to call it, which is really just the one-line email you get from an executive somewhere that says, "Here's the thing we need to do," or the business person, that says, "Here's what we're going to do. We need to work on." I'm really good at that. In fact, I was even able to get in one point. I was able to be a director at a Fortune 50 company. And I had 200 people, 200 engineers that I led every day, just getting the work done. I was good at it. But, I've had business partners do things like steal the domain name because they think they're going to get the code that's attached to it. Oh, yeah, DNS is everything, right? No, it's not. It's just the DNS. But like stealing the domain name to try to take the corporate value, or dumping the source code from the server overnight, or trying to and not being able to get into it. So I'm getting a lockout email at 3 a.m. because somebody triggered the tripwire that I added to the network to detect when people tries to brute force things, aka they didn't get the password right. And what it comes down to is I'm often more happy. I would be happy in this kind of thing where I've got a house with a great internet connection. Like if I owned this property here on my screen and I had lightning fast internet connections and I could get, Prime Now delivery, I would be happy. Man, that would be such a nice thing. Heck, I even take this one. I could fix it up. Just give me good internet access. I'd put solar on the roof. Yeah, I could do it. Maybe plant a nice tomato garden or something. But yeah, I haven't found my Steve. I've found a lot of people that claim to want to build something together and then they get greedy and they steal the company. I had one business partner, she literally went to the bank and drained it of everything. We had a functioning, working business that was making money month after month, and it was growing, it was expanding, it was working. My plan was working. And she decided that she just wanted some cash for some shopping or something. I don't know what the heck it was. Went, pulled the 20 grand we had in the bank out of the account at the worst possible time. And I had to make payroll out of my own funds on a credit card, actually. And then I had to fire everybody because we didn't have the money we needed to keep the account open, because at that time, a merchant account required that we keep a minimum in the account. They found that it was low. They found out what happened. They closed it. She literally killed the company out of greed. And my history is full of stories like that, where I was content in my computer room, in front of my computer. I had what I needed. I had caffeine. I had cheese sticks. I had whatever it is I needed to get the work done, and I did it. And then the business person messed it up. And so the reason I haven't started more companies or kept with them was because, from my perspective, getting a job at a big tech company and getting paid by them to work full time on their stuff is honestly preferable to dealing with all the BS of dealing with scammers and dealing with, startups that end up being killed overnight by my business partner's greed. And that, I think, is the biggest moat the tech companies have. If you are willing to pay an engineer 250 grand a year, 200 grand a year, 150 grand a year, 140 grand a year, whatever, then you're already ahead of the game, because that's assured money. I put in my 8 to 10 hours a day. I don't think about other things. I don't have to worry about that BS. And I'm safe from the drama. I'm safe from the trauma. And that's why. And so I only do startups when I'm not working or between roles, which is to say, now that I'm between roles, I'm thinking about startups again. I'm thinking about all those things. So your question really got to me because every time I've tried, it's always been a matter of, well, how can I be successful this time and mitigate the risks that happened last time? And that's what it is. It's a cycle. It's a constant, how do I start over again, but with the lessons of the past? And what I've realized is that you have to have good business partners. You have to have good social connections to business partners that have been validated as trustworthy and having integrity. And as a software guy, it's really hard to find those people. If you look at the history of the big tech companies, the common people generally went to the same school or had something else in common, and they were able to build out some kind of relationship based on that allowed them to trust each other enough to work together. And so I have not had that. I've been the smartest kid in the room who desperately wishes he wasn't, because let's face it, being the smartest person in the room is not fun at all. Um, I much prefer to be the dumbest person in the room because then I can learn from everybody. Um, and That's what happens. You get successful, the money comes in, everything looks great. And then the business side does something stupid and kills the company. You shed so many tears and possibly even bled for. Or at least that's been my experience. And yet here I am pondering, should I start a company? What would it do? How would I mitigate the threats that happened last time? And that's why I should probably get a job quick, because otherwise I'm going to start competing with the rest of the tech sector. And I would rather collaborate, to be honest.